Your first item is under the marijuana ordinance, discussion with the planning board, land use regulations.
All right. Guys got the topic. Who's going to cover the ground of the materials? We have a basis for this, or is it a general discussion?
I put the agenda together based on the last meeting where the council took a straw poll where they wanted to opt in to the new marijuana laws. So what I did is I kind of looked at Dan Stopford's memo that he gave us, provided us, and I kind of listed some of the things that I think council in the planning board are going to have to work on or come to a decision on. And I started with the land use regulation and then the general authorization of marijuana establishments, and I listed them. And if we're going to do any type of regulation and licensing, and listed some of those that we could consider. And then next steps for the planning board and for legal counsel if we decide we're going to do an ordinance based on the discussion tonight. So that's kind of how this is set up.
One of the questions that I heard coming into tonight was one from counselors is, do you guys as planning board see this as anything more than an adoption of the land use and zoning that you guys already put for the medicinal in play with what you know of the adult use?
It's come to our attention that in our existing land use there is a lot of ambiguity still for people making applications for whatever part of this. So in discussing it today, some of us had loosely discussed making a separate section in our land use ordinance that would deal strictly with this topic, either recreational or medical.
Okay.
And specifically in our land use ordinance, exclude anything that now exists from applying. That way, the thinking was that we would get rid of ambiguity. We have to be careful in doing it because you don't want to restrict what you don't want to restrict. But at the same time, it can be a Wild West show if you're not careful with that ordinance. So that's what. And if we did that, it's going to take some workshop time and some hearing time and all kinds of things that go with that.
Okay. The question within that, anything else from the opt-in provisions under the new legislation that you guys see other than addressing the ambiguity that you spoke to? Okay.
She wants to say something, but
from the state?
From the state.
I'm very confused at what the state is doing. And I think that why by opting in makes us a little vulnerable, because then by opting in we are having to do exactly what the state says, correct, Crawford? As far as any of the regulations?
Correct. The town is free to impose municipal regulations on the types of marijuana businesses that it chooses to opt in for. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think it makes sense for the town to give careful thought about what are the regulations that should apply before that opt-in decision becomes effective. And no vote has been taken, but I understand the consensus of the council is to opt in. So I think
to clarify, the fact is they would be willing to be able to have that discussion. They didn't say whether they would opt in. The fact is they were receptive to at least having that dialogue. I mean, because I can tell you my view has always been retail is retail is retail, but a couple of those other votes, they were at least willing to have the discussion. So they weren't swayed one way or the other, but at least moving this discussion forward.
I'm going to try and attempt to condense it to how I understand it without dumbing it down too much. But from what I understand is the state law or the provision allows towns to go ahead and prohibit adult recreational marijuana, and we're not allowed to restrict or prohibit medicinal marijuana.
We can the businesses.
Limit
the retail of the medicinal.
We can't ban
caregivers.
medicinal.
Right.
The primary caregivers.
Okay.
I had a question that was asked to me, and I think it would probably be best to actually clarify that, is explain the key differences between medicinal and recreational, now adult use marijuana for enforcement, and what the role for the town would be under each category, if somebody could address that, just for the listening public. I think that speaks to what Scott was just actually saying on that, is there are two different enforcement, what the roles of the town are very different. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So each of the laws contemplate really 4 types of businesses that a municipality can choose to allow. On the adult use side, we have marijuana stores selling marijuana and marijuana products. We have cultivation facilities. We have product manufacturing facilities. And we have testing facilities. On the medical side, we have registered primary caregiver retail stores. Now, primary caregivers who don't operate a retail store, the town does not have the option of either limiting or prohibiting that category. But if a primary caregiver chooses to operate a retail store, and the law allows a primary caregiver to operate one retail store, the town has discretion to either prohibit that or limit it and to regulate that. The second category of business under medical is registered dispensaries. Currently there's 8 in the state. The new statute allows for up to 10 additional. And so we can anticipate that there likely may be additional dispensaries on the medical side that are interested in opening up. The third type of medical business is a manufacturing facility. Again, that's edibles, ointments, and things like that. And the fourth is a testing facility. So there's obviously parallels on each side, and the law does allow some businesses to operate on both sides of the law. So marijuana stores, adult use marijuana stores can't sell medical marijuana or vice versa. Those have to be separate facilities. But as far as cultivation facilities, manufacturing facilities, and testing facilities, the law allows businesses to operate on both sides of the law, subject to certain restrictions on keeping the products and the processes separate for each and keeping a record and tracking that. So, so those are the types of businesses that the town has the right to allow. Unless the town votes to allow them, they won't be allowed. And if the town allows it, the town has the right to regulate those. And that could be land use regulation, licensing, performance standards, and other things associated with that. But that's, I think, that's what I understand the council will be looking to the planning board for developing recommendations on, as far as assuming those types of businesses are allowed, what are the suggested regulations that should be imposed on them.
Now, smoking parlors, that would be categorized under marijuana stores.
That's not.
I think you're referring to a retail social club.
Yeah.
Which the legislature, in its wisdom, has seen fit to not permit. So that was part of the legislation that was adopted by the voters, but as part of all those amendments that have happened, they cut that out. So that particular type of business is not permitted.
Kim, I know you're a guest here tonight. By all means, why don't you step forward, identify, is there anything else there that you would actually add to what Dan's given us for an overview?
My only question is, it was my understanding that unless you had something in your municipal ordinance, that the caregiver storefronts weren't prohibited until there was something that stated that it was prohibited. And that's why a lot of towns right now are actually having that conversation and working that in. And looking back, because there's a lot of people that are already operating right now, and there's nothing that prohibits them in the rules and regulations currently, a caregiver to be able to do that. So the only way we could do something with that is to work that into your ordinance. That was my understanding with other municipalities that I've been working with.
So I believe, at least my understanding of the new law, which doesn't go into effect until
December at the earliest, right?
About 90 days. We were talking about whether the legislature has in fact adjourned to set off that 90-day.
We've been closing that session for a month and a half now.
Right,
so, yeah.
right, exactly. So at that time, in 90 days or so, that new legislation will go into effect, and at that point, towns will have to opt in to allow those.
Right.
But you're right that under current law,
Right.
under current state law, a caregiver can operate a retail store.
Sure.
Now, what Lisbon has done is to adopt a moratorium on all types of medical marijuana businesses in order to sort of allow space for these boards to consider
Sure.
how they want to regulate.
Sure.
So if there's already a medical marijuana retail store operating here with municipal approval that predates the date of the moratorium, then they would be grandfathered. But any new...
I didn't know you needed municipal.
You need approval. Yeah, they need that stamp from the municipality, absolutely. And not picking straws here, one of the things when I was reading through stuff that you guys did here in Lisbon, when you put the first moratorium on that was just addressing recreational cannabis, 3 paragraphs down, one of the first things that you guys had in there is it says you will not limit the privileges or the rights afforded by the Maine Medical Marijuana Act. So then when you enacted the moratorium that kind of bound them together, so to speak, that's a little bit of a conflict, at least when I read through the moratoriums, because we're saying that we're never going to have any limitations in the medical program, but then later on we're saying, I think, and probably what caused that is now maybe some storefronts were popping up, or maybe people started coming into the planning board and wanted to apply, and then it was like, oh, because everybody does need that moment to pause just to be able to figure out how are we going to address this, what are we going to do as people are coming in. So that seems to be a little bit of a conflict, at least from what I've read from the work that you guys have done here.
Well, the prior moratorium has expired.
Right, that's what I thought expired.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. So the new moratorium is separate and independent from the expired moratorium.
Same verbiage, though? I mean, do you still have that piece in there in the new moratorium?
No, okay. Not as part of the new. The new moratorium is only addressed to medical marijuana businesses. It doesn't.
You're not addressing rec at all in that new moratorium.
Correct. Other than making reference to the fact that both laws are now in effect, or coming into effect, and the goal is to be strategic and thoughtful about
how this rolls out.
Yeah.
Sure, understood. Those are the only
Okay.
things I had based on what we just shared so far. Yeah.
I guess we brought in the conversation associated with the moratorium is. Is there anything that actually needs to be further addressed for what the intent or protections afforded to the town of the moratorium that was put in place?
I don't believe so. I think it just gives you the space to decide how you're going to deal with both types of businesses.
When the 90 days kicks in, is the intent. That's where the time frame.
Yeah, the goal of the moratorium is to get you beyond the 90 days, because in 90 days you're going to have to, at that point, that's when the law that allows them not
To address it one way or the other.
Yeah.
Any questions associated with the moratorium in general from?
Well, from my end of it on code enforcement, so somebody brings me in an application, what I can't even accept the application at this point? Is that?
Correct.
For
Because
either
there's
medical
currently a
or-
moratorium on
Right.
medical marijuana businesses, and adult use businesses aren't yet.
So it can't even come to the planning board or anything until
Correct.
we actually opt in.
Yep.
Or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
exactly.
lifted,
Yeah.
Or lift the moratorium.
or lifted.
Well, if you lift it, you still have to opt in.
Right.
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 Yeah.
Okay. Time frame, you guys already covered that. There's nothing from the medical side that has a time frame other than the fact is it's kind of following suit with the new legislation for the recreational or adult. Is that correct?
Correct. Once the new law goes into effect,
So it's
there
kind of a
won't be any-
transitional thing.
won't be any
Everything,
allowed.
the basis of for what was already in play for medicinal is going to stay, but it just falls under pseudo the new umbrella. What's different
Still
with
two ordinances.
It's still two ordinances, still two enforcements. So
One's in play now, we have to opt in, and one's not, and will be 90 days after the session adjourns. We have a moratorium, hopefully covering that period of time. And then either we opt in or we don't.
and that's my understanding too. I just want to make sure that was clear. And is there anything anybody's saying to work against that?
To me, the question is, I think the planning board wants to deal primarily with land use, not licensing and not things like that. I think
And have it revert
people
back
have
to the states?
No,
Because we can make it as restrictive.
I think that
More
would
than
be
the
the
state.
smart
right,
thing to
that,
do.
no, not have, I don't think
With the
the
state
planning
board.
board wants to get involved.
That
in
is not the
process.
intent.
With the
Right,
state.
right. Sorry, Eric, I cut you off. Sorry.
Yeah, why can't we just wait till the state does what they're gonna do and we follow suit on what they're doing, so we're not conflicting with that? Otherwise, when they do put something in, we may have to change it anyway.
What are you
Speaking
talking
about recreation, or you're speaking about medical?
Right.
On the recreational side.
We're not.
What are they gonna do?
The ordinance, Eric, the ordinances are all in place.
Correct.
State law's already
They're
passed.
already done, completed. So
But
the
Not in effect yet,
recreational
though,
or the
right?
adult use, I guess is the better term for it, the adult use is now in effect with a requirement to opt in any or all of it. The medical takes effect 90 days after the,
Okay.
and if we did not have an ordinance, people could apply for it. Now, we do. We have a moratorium. So the time between now and whenever opt-in happens is the time we need to decide what and how many and everything else, what we're going to decide. So from the standpoint of the planning board, again, I think we have to stick mostly with land use and not anything else that's in there.
So your point is that you see the planning board's jurisdiction as the land use enforcement, and if there's a desire for a licensing
Right.
regimen,
That's
then that
council.
would be the council's
Right.
decision.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Wasn't all that clear about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, my interest is in regulating where these things are more than anything. It's, for example, I don't think stores belong out in residential areas. I think they belong in a village or commercial zone. I think there's some separation between schools and these facilities. There are certain things that are commonly addressed here that I think we would like to do as land use regulators, minimally, actually.
Actually, that's the tougher
hearing you
part.
guys' workshop on shops on the topic, the fact is I think you were proactive that way with knowing that the recreational or adult use part of it was coming, not to try to draw the line of the fact is medicinal versus recreational. Are we still going to accept these kind of things in these kinds of areas? And I know
We actually did on our land use chart.
Yeah, I
We
know you
finalized on not making two categories. So our land use chart right currently says marijuana retail sales. And then it tells you where, which is in our commercial
reason.
village area only. But
But
the issue gets muddy in regards to, I get a lot of phone calls, they're going to actually use the facility to grow and do retail. So, and if you've got two different land uses and trying to fit that in the box, and is that allowed under the new laws? Can Can they grow in the same facility that they can sell from? Those are some of the confusing things for me, and I've been to all kinds of training, and I'm still confused 3 years later on
Good.
where this stands,
'Cause
so.
I heard those same questions here tonight, so it's further down the list, but
That's what I was saying earlier when we were talking about it, is if you make this whole thing applicable to everything but marijuana, adult or medical, then you can write the section for medical and adult use separately as part of the same chapter.
Okay.
And address it more specifically so we don't have ambiguities in it.
Flesh out some of the specifics that relate to that cause.
So but that's probably the hard work.
So everybody clear at this point what it means to actually opt in? You're speaking specifically on the adult side.
Opting is on the,
If we
No.
again, that's where more confusion is with people.
That's why I wanted
Some
to
of you
say-
think we're talking about rec right now, and some of you think we're talking about medicinal. And that's where you guys got to draw the line.
Right.
Because this is sometimes is why people get confused by listening to this circle right here.
Medicinal is its own animal. The fact is, we don't have an opt-in. It's actually already regulated by the state. We have limited involvement at best. We're strictly talking about
But the town
adult
can still
use.
opt in for medicinal on a repeal for the moratorium and open it up for storefronts on specifics that are already written in there for
medicinal.
marijuana. Correct. That's what I wanna
Good
hear.
now, yeah.
Correct.
After you just put the moratorium in place, I don't think that's going to happen, but yeah.
Anything's possible, Don.
Kim, I saw you nodding. Anything you'd like to clarify on that?
Well, yeah, one of the biggest confusion, it does seem that people can get confused between the rec and the adult use. So usually when we have these conversations, we try to tackle one and try to keep the two separate so that everybody can kind of stay on the path and really understand what we're discussing and when you're getting into the nitty-gritty, so to speak.
Because we really shouldn't be talking about, I don't want to interrupt you, about recreational because
That's what I was just going to say.
This is more about what's medicinal and what's really out there.
I certainly recommend being proactive with thinking and putting some thought behind where you want these businesses, if you do, and where they'd be located in the town. But right now, it seems like you really need to address the medical piece. That seems to be the business at hand that's being discussed. We don't know. I mean, the soonest we're looking at doing anything in rec is going to be probably right before next summer. And that could even be postponed again. This could get bumped out yet again. There's always chatter about that. It doesn't mean that they're going to have everything in place to be ready for all of us. So rec can kind of take a back burner to the conversation right now so that you can address that medical piece. That seems to be what's pressing.
The medical retail that I think
Right, the medical retail is the issue. That I don't want to see a bunch of stores pop up in residential neighborhoods just because I had 2 patients in there.
Dennis just said that it was in the
Commercial and village only, we already have that in our land use.
already in place.
Near a school.
And I think
Correct.
that during the session when we all talked, that was the whole point of trying to focus, like Don said, on the land use, because to us, this is the land use. We were trying to purposely not look at recreational or medical. We were just saying this is the land use, no matter which way in the future, to be prepared.
You guys even went to the point of putting certain categories as conditional to at least notify neighbors to at least bring it before you guys to be heard.
Can I see the land use chart? I think you had that there.
We got a copy here for you if you want. I highlighted the areas that affect. Anybody else, there's 12 more copies here if anybody wants. Our land use chart, pass it around.
Dan, you had something you were going to say too?
I understood one of the reasons that the town instituted the moratorium, the new moratorium, was to look at both adult use and medical sort of holistically, and sort of tackle them both at once. But
I gave them all
ultimately, you're not required to do that, but
that was the intent.
That was what I understood.
Anybody down there didn't get one that would need one? Oh, yeah, I mean.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
You said Kim?
Yeah, they could certainly.
I did.
You said that the, quote, you're not going to attack the recreational till next year? What are you talking about?
Well, they need to get the regulations. They're still looking for people to even start working on the regulations and the rulemaking. So just my experience working with the state is we have deadlines, but we don't always meet them. So we've already had recreation get kind of bumped. And I'm just saying that there's a possibility that they won't have everything ready for us again even come April of next year.
So, yeah, even though the law's in place,
We could just be...
we don't
Just
have
like just like the DOT, they can just drag on and on and on. And we are talking about the state, remember?
Yeah. Things change, legislation changes, governments change.
Yeah.
A lot is fluid, so I know a lot of people are kind of pausing when it comes to recreation right now and really trying to figure out the medical and with the new regulations coming in. So.
From a land use standpoint, I think we could still spend
Address
the
the
time and
specifics.
address them both and not have to do anything about it, just address them both while we're.
Okay.
Opinions?
I see a lot of towns that have had medical retail stores popping up, and I just think I would rather see other towns perhaps be the trailblazers or the guinea pigs, whichever way it turns out. And I do see that Lisbon has really made some really great progress on businesses the past few years, and I worry about long-term maybe property values being affected. I think our property values are finally on their way up. Properties are selling very quickly in town. I think there's a lot of other things to look at. I would like to see what spring does bring, and I think it's easier to prevent a problem than to fix one afterwards. And I'm probably a conservative person, but I think I'm not against the businesses or the product. I just worry, I would like to see other towns and how they solve. I mean, we still have a lot of problems in Colorado. Banking is the biggest issue. It's forcing it to be cash business in many areas because banks won't allow the deposits and all. And whether we're ignoring the elephant in the room or the elephants in Washington, I think it's not nationally government approved, and there are a lot of federal restrictions, and that maybe we should veer on the side of caution and just wait a little longer, since the state can't seem to get things together, and if the state can't get it together, I think it's asking an awful lot out of little old Lisbon.
I think the state already has it together for the medicinal side, correct? They already said that.
Even with the retail stores?
Yeah. Again, we've been talking about this. This has been going on for a couple of years. I remember
I
Kim
know.
being here a couple of years ago talking about
I do
this.
too.
Again, your concerns about property value. Again, everybody here's got a valued opinion about how they feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
Again, you're supposed to make progress for the town, not continue to drag your feet like DOT. You're supposed to, people in your town, taxpayers in your town, own property in your town, are looking to put in legitimate medicinal storefronts. Follow the land use chart, be in the right location, everything in their place done up to spec to improve the neighborhood, not to bring it down, not to bring property taxes down. There's nobody here or nobody that's even on that television thinking about it. It's just going to stand up a cardboard box in between your school and your church and start selling pot. It's not what it's about.
No, that's not
And
what I'm
if
saying.
that's what you're concerned about, you shouldn't be concerned about that, because I'm pretty sure everybody's professional. They're going to make every place that they're going to do up to snuff, so that it's an asset to this town, not a liability. It's my opinion.
If people do things well, that's fabulous.
Absolutely.
I have a personal opinion
I'll
too,
have you
that
over
I
to
don't
the
think that we
Can
can limit the number, the types of places that we have. They're all legal,
Look at
and
it.
I don't
they
think
just have
anybody
to
Do
be
a building that
done
nobody
right
cared about.
and in the right place. And I agree with Chris on in the right place. My only question is, as Alan said, retail is retail. Does the council have anything in mind that they wouldn't want to limit quantities of stores or places?
They had, I'll get through the list. Again, it's conditionally allowed in village, commercial, and development. What's DD?
Right now.
Diversified development. It's only one small area of town, which is by Springworks Farms. That section there is a small diversified development zone, not much.
And the point that I was trying to make with that is that being sensitive to property values and that kind of stuff is why they're there. Because when they come to you, you at least have something to go back on to be able to look at it from the code enforcement side.
I do have one concern I'd like to make about the retail sales of product manufactured on premises, which also allows the rural open space 1 and 2. That's a lot of that is residential zone out there, and I think there should be some kind of limits on the size of any facility you're going to have. If you're going to allow, farm stand out there, don't allow it to be a, giant 20,000-foot retail. I don't want, somebody getting off on the highway to buy, stuff.
That was the main reason why there's a need to I think there's a need to separate this section from the section that deals with that.
You don't really want to say big greenhouses downtown.
So you don't have that issue.
Right. I think if a greenhouse out, in the middle of nowhere, and have a retail store somewhere appropriate is fine, but you don't want to be, put right in the middle of a neighborhood with a giant retail store because it was residential too, so you get away with that.
Which is why the two of those were actually slated as conditional.
I would never have that.
Exactly. And I respect you.
Plant somewhere in the country, retail in the city.
Exactly.
If I was
That's how I feel about it.
That's how I feel about it too.
able to make a small recommendation on that, one way that might be able to me, that would clarify this a lot further than we've gotten, even when we spend a lot of time on the land use chart trying to figure out how to put this in the right box. And we have some of the things I highlighted that you're bringing up there, Mark, were just where somebody could, it's just too vague. There's a couple categories that almost say the same thing, but don't spell out. But really, with what legal had provided us here, if the state has actually categorized this now into 4 categories, then we could use that exact same category language for our land use chart, and it would mirror exactly what the state law is, like the registered primary caregiver. We can use that same language and create those pieces on a land use chart and follow right along exactly what they've adopted. But it might be one way to help clarify some of that.
As long as we go back and say that what exists now doesn't apply for this stuff.
Right, because the one you read was geared toward farm stands. We hadn't, this issue wasn't on the table a few years ago, so it was more farm stands.
Right,
wanted to
where
have
a farm stand gets successful and explodes into a big, huge retail, so then you got Walmart up there. That's not what we want to see.
Big buds.
Oh, you got to.
Because the firecracker place is going south.
Yeah.
Right?
That'd be one way, possibly, to look at the land use chart, is to actually just use the exact same language what the state
exactly.
has.
That's what I'm.
And then when they do the recreational side, if they do, they've got those 4 categories. We can add those 4 categories in on the recreational side when that becomes relevant.
But the harder part of that is you got them all in, and then you have to decide where, and if you're going to have limited quantities or any of that stuff.
Well, that's the land use
That's
piece
the
that the
hard
planning
part.
board would take up and sort
points
out.
right there. I'm pretty sure we can straighten them out.
Okay.
So
Do you know if somebody opts in, or if a municipality opts in, is that a permanent opt-in, or does it?
that was my very next question. If
Was
we
it?
had a simple
Just a question,
and it just took a 10-minute conversation, let's have it tackle a hard one.
Right. The law doesn't address it. I don't think you're required to permanently opt in. But I think
businesses would be
if you,
grandfathered if they started
right,
out.
Correct.
Yeah, you wouldn't shut one down, right.
Right.
But I just didn't know, I knew that, but I didn't
If
know.
the town were to
have to
go in
opt
a
in to
different
liquor, but
direction,
you can't be grandfathered.
potentially would be grandfathering.
A couple of years later, it's not working out, there's big problems, the town could actually, I'm just wondering how that works, but if they could actually opt out at that point. But
And again, you're not talking about a
I
big
think
giant
they
number,
should,
Don. I'm
I
pretty sure
believe
you're
they
talking
can opt
about
out for additional
people in the
businesses,
audience,
but
and maybe a
the
few
question
watchers.
Doesn't it, so,
You're talking about.
But if you guys are real successful, more people may jump in the market.
You are
I'd challenge that statement only because I get at least 5 to 6 phone calls a week of people trying to
We
open
got
up.
8 haircutters in the neighborhood. I mean, some are going to make it, some are not.
Yep.
Just like with,
If demand will
storefronts.
be supply.
That's it. Some will make it and some won't.
All right. The question within that is that we already covered the fact is it's not covered in the future. The fact is, the question was asked is that we do it for the entire thing, knowing that you get stuck with people that are stuck in there, or what's the recourse with the business that there are specific issues that aren't complying?
Well, I think that might be a reason to consider a licensing. There's a couple of reasons why you might want to consider licensing. One is that on adult use, the town is going to have a role in administering adult use applications
Afterwards.
regardless of whether you have a licensing scheme. So there's going to be some additional work for the town associated with that, because when somebody applies for an adult use license, they get a conditional license, and then they have to go to the town and get a certification from the town that it's permitted before they can go back to the state and get a permanent license, an active license. So there's going to be some, there's going to be some.
So it will be equivalent to
Right.
a local version of a liquor license?
Right.
The fact is, you either revoke the license and the business is not allowed to be able to do that anymore?
Correct.
Is that
The state's gonna leave it up to the municipality to decide.
whether we want to get
who's
into
getting
that
those
piece or not?
licenses.
Yeah.
On the recreational side or the medicinal side?
So,
On the rec side.
Recreational,
Yeah.
that's what I understood
As
too.
long as everybody
So
out there hears it.
as a condition
Again,
of
we're
the
crossing
adult
lines
use
again
license,
from medicinal to
there could be
recreational.
expectations that would result in
Revocation of the license. But that's a consideration beyond,
Yeah.
if we choose just to go the land use, that we might want to consider.
Right. Right. I see it different. That's a different issue than the land use
Right,
regulation.
which is where the question was asked. I mean, you covered clearly that state does not cover opt-out as an option once you're in, but how do you deal with the specific, and the licensing is a potential thing down the line. You guys already covered that one. Are there any specific restrictions identified for, everything I hear is that medical has to be separate from recreational. What does that physically mean? Are we talking a door? Are we talking a separate premise? Are we talking different area? What are we talking?
Right now, the way that stands, if a patient were to have, if there's 6 rec plants and there's 6 medical plants, they could be in the same space. They have to be labeled differently. So your rec plants, on your tag on that plant somewhere, you have to have your driver's license for whoever's plants those belong to. And in medical, you have those plants labeled for a patient number that you assign to those patients that you have. So that's pretty much the only way that they have to be stored separately at this point in time.
Are you talking about a store? He's talking about a store.
Store.
He's talking about a
Store.
Okay, well, a retail store and a medical store are never going to be able to be one. And that will have to be like a completely separate, it could be like one big building.
Separate building?
We're talking about a separate wall, 2 separate entrances, like they can never be commingled. Nothing from one can be commingled with the other, ever, ever. That includes your plants being grown. Everything has to, again, you're looking at 2 different regulated markets, medical and rec. So nothing is intertwined.
And we as a community have a involvement with only the adult use side of it, so where does that mirror to what the efforts of the state is doing when there's potential there for, how do you enforce the commingling not happening?
On the medical side, like what does the
Period.
state do enforcement-wise?
Yes.
Right now, until some rulemaking changes and that new bill is passed, the only way that caregivers currently are inspected is if there's on some kind of a complaint. We have a couple complaint investigators, so someone would call CDC, and then they would have those complaint investigators go out. If it's something that's criminal, well, they contact law enforcement, and law enforcement would take care of that. If it was something that was with a code enforcement officer, if it's a smell, or some kind of violation like that, well, now we're going to be addressing that, at a municipal level. So medical is kind of regulated. There's already systems in place for whatever that issue is that's coming up. There's someone that's already working on that. Very soon, as soon as this new bill is enacted, then the caregivers will be inspected. That will be an annual inspection that the CDC or an entity from them will come out and start inspecting. So they'll be looking for safety concerns, code stuff, fire stuff. All of those things will be on that checklist. Including your pesticide. If they spray with pesticides, then they have to have a license through the Department of Ag. They have to show documentation for that. Their employees, there's a lot of systems in play for the caregivers already, as far as enforcement and people that are keeping tabs on what they're doing.
Okay.
And then REC will be its own entity. They'll have an enforcement. They'll have people that do those inspections.
At the state level.
Yep. And then some of it will still come back to the municipality. Code enforcement is always going to be part of that process. So.
Okay, the question within that then is mixed business use within the same facility. I don't care about medical and adult use at this point, but if I can have apartments above a liquor store, can I have apartments above a recreational storefront? Do they treat that any different if retail is retail?
We actually, in our specific case for this town, we actually have, it's kind of a quirky ordinance, but the way our commercial zone works is you can't have a residential over the top of commercial.
So it doesn't. So it's
village, you can. So So some you can, some you wouldn't be able to, according to our land use chart now, but.
Okay, so
in
that's the way we
commercial,
take
we
care
only
of it.
allow the groundskeeper, maintenance guy, or the landowner to live residentially above a commercial. It's kind of weird, but that's how ours is set up now. But village, the whole idea of a village zone is for that mixed commercial and residential use, so that wouldn't be prohibited, so.
Are there any restrictions at the state level for mixed commercial uses within the same facility?
Never going to be permitted. They have to be separate at all times. That's not going to change.
So a storefront on one floor and a recreational adult use building, on the first floor is going to not be allowed?
Well, yeah, if they're two separate entities, like if we're leasing this space and we're leasing this space, then yeah, that would be certainly permissible, unless it was zoned differently with
As long as its own business within that.
Sure.
And I'm envisioning our downtown. They're right back to back to back, and we have multiple buildings that have two businesses in the same storefront. How retail is retail. How can you discourage one by? That's why I figured I'd at least float that question here publicly.
What's that?
Right.
What was the question? What was this thing?
He was pub tobacco store.
Oh.
So
I'm just wondering if that's the same word is basically.
Like a liquor store or something. Do we
Right.
have anything in the existing ordinances about, apartments about, like, liquor stores or,
No, it's zoning only. If it's in commercial zone, then
Right.
it doesn't matter what the commercial business is.
In village zone, could you have, an apartment with people having kids above a liquor store or a tobacco store?
Locally, we don't have
No, we
anything
don't have
that,
anything like that.
state-wise, I'd have to look at liquor laws to know, but.
We used to have. I mean, they were here physically. I don't know if they're.
Yeah, I mean, how many convenience stores have apartments over the top? I mean, it's pretty common.
the next question that I heard, is there any restrictions? When do you actually move from a storefront to a warehouse operation, and how much can be stored on premises?
Well, I don't think anyone's ever going to be storing all of their rec stuff in a warehouse. I really don't think that would be the case. Usually in the retail operations, you see people that they don't have a lot of product that just sits there in the store. Like they kind of have an idea over the course of a week or a month. They have an understanding of how many patients they're seeing and a rough idea of how much they're limited of what they can even have on hand to some degree. So you're never going to have a lot of product sitting in the store. And when it comes from a security point of view, the caregiver's never going to want it all stored there because that's an easy hit. I mean, it's just let's go rob that place. Even with great security systems, if someone wants to get in, they're going to get in. No one wants to lose all that product. I promise.
Well, I'm going to go next.
Sure.
Are there any restrictions specifically identified by the state what can be in either a medicinal or adult use
It's yeah.
per patient on medical? Thank you.
Yep.
How about recreational? Is there
There's no laws for recreation.
We don't have anything at all. No direction on the rec side at all about what will be permissible.
So the state
They're
has not
allowed to
addressed
have
that
the
piece.
2.5 pounds that's ready to sell to their patient, and then they're allowed to have up to 8 pounds. So they can have some stuff that's curing. That could be their tinctures and their salves and all of those things too. All of that gets compiled into that amount
total.
that they're allowed to have per patient.
Okay. Now, one of the other classifications that was brought in this was the cultivation. Are there anything on warehousing in the recreational or adult use side of things that are coming down the line?
Again, no real. They're going to have some canopy limitations on that rec side. So different tiers of licensing that people can apply for, but that's really the only direction. It's just a matter of how big do you want your garden to be, and this is what your licensing fee is going to be.
I believe there's 2 tiers that are right in there, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was discussion of 3, but I think they'll probably settle out at the 2. That was the last pass that we've kind of seen.
Tier 1 was like up to 40 or something,
Yes.
and a tier 2 was like 200 or something. I can't remember the exact numbers. I don't have it in front of me.
It was scaled so that there could be, the caregiver would be able to continue operating the way they do with limited plants, and then someone that really wanted to kind of really blow it out, then they could go into a warehouse. That's not what most people are looking to do.
And on the adult use side, there's 4 tiers of cultivation facilities that address limits on plants based on the square footage of plant canopy. There's no specific provision in the law about storage.
Physical, how much on hand at any given time. The only reason I ask is it is a little troubling at times to hear the size of the scope of what some of these facilities in other communities in this state are being discussed. And we're right smack central Maine, that it could be a consideration down the line if it isn't thought out, which is why I brought it up.
Councilor Ward.
Please.
Can I add, from a planning board standpoint, from the workshops, the reason why we're stressing land use is really to protect not only the town, but the code enforcement officer of, it's clear. So, I think going by, the legal terminology, we've got a good groundwork put into place. You just add those four, did you say 3 or 4?
4 categories.
4
right
categories that you talked about, and I think that would help with not splitting hairs. I guess that's just how I look at it.
Sure.
Straightforward.
Protects protects the whole piece, whether it's one or the other.
In regard to that, I would just have one question then. Is there any sense of the council that wants to prohibit any one of those categories up in the adult use side?
Which are storefronts, cultivation, manufacturing, and testing.
I don't know what the pros and cons of all of that is, but
neither do I. The one that we're actually, when we were talking about the storefront, would be the one that, when everybody thinks about this, that is the one that is on the forefront of people's minds to be able to say retail is retail. I mean, my simplified version associated with that, I don't even protest to know anything about any of the other 3.
No disrespect, that's what I was just going to ask, is this is a good opportunity. If people don't understand what those other businesses are, like, we can define that and give an overview of exactly. A lot of people don't even know what a testing lab is.
I was just gonna ask what that is.
So, yes, we have a couple testing labs in the state. We need many more. We actually don't have enough to keep up with the demand that we have. But it is just it's a facility with equipment that they're able to test the potency of cannabis products. They're able to give a cannabinoid profile of a THC or CBD potency. They're able to figure out if there is any pesticides that happen to be in any of the products. They're able to test for molds, pathogens, and things of that nature, residual solvent, excuse me, on things that are extracted. So those are things that currently by state statute are not required, but most of us that are making products and selling, we do have our cannabis tested. That is something that will be required down the road. So we really are going to need those testing labs. And businesses that want to embrace that, they are not permitted in rec to be able to be part of cultivation or retail or processing. If you were going to test, then that is the only business that you're able to do in cannabis. It's a standalone. And the people that do embrace that, I know when I was helping to open up the dispensary in New Hampshire, we had to actually find someone that would be willing to test all of our cannabis before any of us were able to open. And that was really a challenge, and a lot of people that I spoke with didn't want to do it because they were investing millions of dollars on that testing, and because we only had 4 dispensaries in the state, they would never make enough money to recapture that equipment cost. Over here, if we have it required, there's a lot of testing labs that want to come from other states because they realize that there's a need here, but until we mandate that and make it required, they're not going to make enough money to make it worthwhile. But it would be unfortunate if towns started prohibiting the testing labs because we really need them. But I see them being located in areas, you have to go and drop off a sample, like a very small amount of cannabis. So I know in some other towns we've worked with, people were worried that there's going to be all kinds of traffic and we're acquiring tractor trailers worth of cannabis. And what people don't understand, we're talking like a small dot, of oil that's being tested or tincture, and a piece of flower for cannabis that's smaller than my thumbnail, so we're not talking about an awful lot of it. But you do have to have drop-off locations that are convenient for people to have it tested. So
the point I would want to know, if we're sitting here as a planning board trying to figure out what limitations or locations or anything else for this. I would like to consult with somebody to know actually what we're dealing with.
Sure.
'Cause I get the testing, that seems relatively simple.
Sure.
But when you talk about cultivation and manufacturing,
That's
that's a little bit more
Yeah.
broader.
There's, well, I've heard manufacturing in people kind of group that with the cultivation. So when you do that, that is just the growing of the plants. That's all it is that is where you grow the plants, usually, harvest. But that's all that cultivation is really that gardening aspect of the cannabis space. Processing, and also manufacturing that some people call it, that is, you could be extracting the cannabis to put it into an oil. But that also means that we could be making cookies or tinctures or salves. So when you see that processing piece, candies, that's really what that entails. It's that processing. So you'll see even right now in medical, we have a bill that passed with emergency legislation this year that allows us to be able to apply for a processing in the medical space right now because a lot of caregivers are already manufacturing that, and we've wanted a license for a long time, so now we finally had a bill that addressed that. But almost every caregiver, not many patients really use only flower. They'll always use another product, so we needed a path to be able to address that and have some license and some regulations to that. But that would be extraction and then putting it into a product. Okay?
There is some possibility of use of hazardous materials in that.
There is.
Yeah.
Alcohol right now is not considered one of those hazardous materials, but if you were using some kind of a gas or something like that, or CO2 that's under pressure, that's where some people have some concerns, and training is going to be required. Right now, some of the pieces of extraction equipment that people go out and purchase are $300,000. So when you buy that piece of equipment, usually you get a guy that comes out with it that spends a whole week showing you how to operate that machine, how to fix it, safety, all the concerns that are there. So it's not like people just go out and buy a machine and kind of fire it up. There's a lot of training and knowledge that has to go behind doing that. And I think the state will require some kind of a certification or...
Starting
They
this
do.
summer, you have to have an engineer sign off on
A lot of regulations and stuff like that put in place for the processing, and I'd say you definitely,
Very strict.
very strict regulations. But you
Again,
definitely want the testing facilities because you want to know that what everyone here is producing for your patients.
have the opportunity to say yes or no to any of these.
Right, the full categories.
Anything at all. You guys, everything has to come to this group of people before anything can happen in town. So before somebody comes in and opens up a double-story marijuana retail facility, all you guys have to say, okay, let's let this double-story happen right in the middle of the village. That's so all the worry you guys have all the ability right now to say yes or no. Like you guys have done with me several times. I've been approved under the town 3 times. Now here we are. I finally get a spot. I finally got it, and now we're under a moratorium. I didn't know about that about two weeks ago. So, I mean, I've been working for 2 years with you guys, and here we are. I finally get my spot, and now you guys tell me I can't do it. You know how, and I've come to the town manager. She said, no, you know what? I don't want you in 3 spots in my town, 3 different spots.
You haven't said that.
Well, you said, I'd rather not see you there. So, being a decent guy, I let it go, and I was like, hey, I'm not going to set up a shop down at the gas station. I'm not going to set up a shop at Spaghetti. I'm not going to set up a shop at Great Beers. I'm not going to set up a shop, where else was the 3rd one? There was a 3rd one right in town, so I said, no, we'll wait till we get the right spot. I was approved for Benoit's, and I was approved for Apex. Unfortunately, both the landlords got cold feet and said, hey, we have mortgages on this place. If you come in here, they might recall my mortgage, and we can't take that risk. We can't do it. So what I needed to do then is find somebody who didn't have a mortgage on the building. So what do you know? Here we are, 2 weeks into a new moratorium, and I find somebody who's willing to give me a spot in the industrial park. Perfect spot, plenty of parking, away from everybody, and we're under a moratorium. So sometimes, these moratoriums can be good, but then on the other hand, it destroys people, what they've been working for. Because, I mean, you guys have seen me here numerous times trying to work with you, and Dennis has worked his ass off trying to do this land use chart along with everybody else. So everyone's got a lot